One of the best ways to experience Greece is by island hopping, and in this video I will tell you how to do it, what to expect along the way, and which islands deserve a spot on your Greece itinerary, especially if it's your first time visiting. I spent 3 weeks in Greece last October, and in that time I explored Athens plus 4 islands, all as a first-timer in Greece. So I've got the tips and recommendations you need to help you plan the best Greece itinerary. And this is only one of several videos I have planned from that Greece trip, so make sure you subscribe. There's plenty more on the way. Now, one thing I didn't quite understand right away was how much of Greece there actually is to explore. All of the photos and videos I had seen of Greece up until the point of my trip were of those same whitewashed buildings and blue accents and blue domes, of which there are a lot in Greece, and it's beautiful. But what I learned is that there are so many sides to Greece that I couldn't possibly see it all in my 3 weeks that I had there. Still, I stand by my itinerary, which I will share with you in this video, for first-timers to Greece, especially if what you are expecting and wanting to see is something similar to what you've likely been seeing online about Greece as you do your own research. This itinerary focuses on the Cycladic or the Eclatic island group. But Greece has many different island groups, including Saronic, Ionian, and Dodecanese island groups, just to name a few. And I personally hope and plan that I get to visit a lot more and see all of the different sides of Greece on future trips. Now, even within the Cyclades, there are so many islands to choose from. What was important to me as I planned my own itinerary was to balance some of the more popular islands that we hear about with some of the ones that are quieter Greek islands and maybe not yet as visited by tourists already. I'm going to break down for you each of the islands that I visited, a little bit of context for each on how and why I chose each of these, how to get from island to island, and then in future videos I will be sharing a deeper dive on each of these islands, the best things to do there, the best ways to explore. So again, all of that is coming, and hit subscribe, especially if you are in the midst of planning your Greece trip. That said, if you are right in the midst of planning your Greece trip and you can't wait for all of my videos to come out one by one, I already have a lot of articles and published blog posts on my blog, which I will link in the description below. The very first island on my Greece itinerary was Santorini. Now, I actually did not want to go to Santorini but at all. I wanted to skip it completely. I thought it would be way too touristy, overhyped, too expensive, but as I started mapping out my itinerary, I saw that it would just make the most sense for me to start in Santorini. So sort of begrudgingly, I was like, okay, fine, I guess I'll go to Santorini as part of this itinerary. I know, such problems, right? What a hard life. I started in Santorini and I gave myself just 2 full days there. And as it goes, in the end, I am so glad that my trip worked out that way to include Santorini. I have a full video coming all about Santorini and this thought process and what actually unveiled and what it's really like. That's coming. I had been in Italy right before Greece, so I was able to fly in on a direct flight from Rome straight to Santorini. I flew in very early on the first flight of the day that I arrived, and so I had that full day, then another full day, and then on the 3rd day in the afternoon, early afternoon, is when I left Santorini. And that felt to me like enough time to see everything that I wanted to see in Santorini. I do already have a couple of pretty detailed blog posts about Santorini, so if you have Santorini on your Greece itinerary, or if I just convince you to put it on there, those blog posts are already live and you can check them out on the blog. The next island on my Greece island hopping itinerary was Sifnos. Have you ever heard of Sifnos? I had never heard of Sifnos until I was talking with a friend of mine who happens to spend a lot of time in Greece. Prior to landing on Sifnos, I was exploring spending some time on either Paros or Naxos. But what drew me into Sifnos and really sealed the deal that that is where I would spend some time are 3 things. 1, it has a reputation as a foodie island, and this is because the first chef who ever wrote and released a Greek cookbook was from Sifnos. 2, It's not nearly as tourist popular as some of the other Greek islands, so I thought it would be a good way to balance out my time in Santorini to go to Sifnos right after. And it was. And 3, it is a pretty hikeable and walkable island. So I knew that I did not want to be renting a car anywhere at any point in this trip, and so it was important to me to look for destinations where I could easily get around through public transportation and by foot. So when I saw that Sifnos actually is known for having a lot of hiking trails all around the island, that definitely contributed to sealing the deal for me to go there. I spent 5 days on Sifnos. You could spend 3 or 4 days instead and still have plenty of time to relax and see the different sides of the island. So you have some coastal beach areas that you'll want to check out, and then some villages on the inner part of the island as well. After Sifnos, I took another ferry to get to my next destination. Santorini had an airport and I was able to fly in from Rome. There's only one way on or off Sifnos. You need a ferry. What I'm about to recommend to you next for your Greek island hopping itinerary is different from what I actually did, because live and learn. So I will tell you in a moment what I did, but what I would recommend for you after Sifnos is to go either to Seriphos. So if you like the quieter island vibe, Seriphos will be a little bit more similar to Sifnos in that regard, and maybe you want more of that. Or if you think after Sifnos, it being kind of laid back and quiet, you're going to want somewhere that's a little bit livelier and that has maybe a lot more things to do, then consider going to Paros. Paros has become increasingly popular, gets a decent amount of tourism, which also means that it's set up for tourists, right? In that there are plenty of restaurants, plenty of tours, things to do, nightlife. It's again, a little livelier. If you choose either of these islands, they're not too bad of a ferry ride at all from Sifnos, and you're staying within that same Cyclades Island group, which is what I recommend, especially if you have less time than I did. So I had 3 full weeks to explore, and you might not have that time. What I did, in case you're curious, is I had it set in my brain that I also had to go to Hania on Crete during this trip. And it just wasn't very convenient. I had to take a flight from one of the other islands to go there, and I simply did not have even enough time dedicated to Crete or to Hania to do that island justice. Crete needs you to rent a car and needs you to devote a week just to Crete to explore everything it has to offer. And so I really would say I did myself a little bit of a disservice trying to force that in. You know how it is sometimes when you're going to go that far away. Greece had been on my list forever, and I was like, I have to see everything that I want to see on this trip. I have since wisened up. That's not going to happen, and I hope to go back there. But yes, I recommend that you stay within that island group and do as much as you can in close proximity. That will also keep you from burning out and that travel fatigue, right? Because as fun as island hopping is, there are a lot of travel days involved in getting from one place to another, settling into new accommodations. Stick with Seriphos or Paros after Sifnos, or if you find another island in that area that is interesting to you, look into that instead. So after whatever that next step is that you choose, this is the choose your own adventure part if you're following my itinerary. After that, I strongly recommend you go to this next destination I'm about to suggest to you. Make your way to Syros. This was one of my favorite, if not my absolute most favorite stop on this itinerary. And I do believe that Syros is such an underrated island. Even though it's the capital of the Cycladic group, or the Cycladic group. I know I keep going back and forth on my pronunciation because I cannot decide. Both are correct. Side note, Cycladic. Cycladic is more the modern Greek way to pronounce it, and before I made this video I was looking up how to pronounce it, and now they're both in my head, which is why you're getting this interchangeable definition. Alright, let's get back to it. So Syros is the capital of this island group, and yet I hadn't really ever heard about it. Have you? The way that I knew is because I happened upon a TikTok family who was living on Syros for some time through this program called Boundless Living. And once I started to look into it and saw that it is well known for its Venetian architecture, I was immediately drawn in. And I am so glad that I went. I ended up actually spending my birthday here, and I spent, again, 5 days on Syros, but you could do 3 or 4 days. So the Venetian architecture drew me in, but another reason that I chose this island in particular is because of the time of year of my Greece trip. So I was there in October, and October is a great time. I'll do a separate video all about Greece in October, but October is a good time to go because it's not peak height of tourism season. However, because of that, some of the islands start to shut down in terms of there are less restaurants open, there's less things to do. By the time that I got to Syros, it was mid-October, and I wanted to choose an island where a good amount of people lived and worked year-round, so that it was not as dependent on tourism and was more likely to have a lot of things open, and it worked out well for me. And it wasn't all that busy. It didn't feel very crowded. It didn't feel like there were a lot of tourists there, and yet it felt lively and energetic. You know, people are just living there and enjoying their lives. That's the feeling that I got. I really enjoyed it. And this was the place that when I landed, I texted my sister and said, I think I need to come back here for like a month or two, just live and work from here. I liked it that much. Unfortunately, at the time of recording this video, I don't yet have my Syros blog post completed, but it is on my list of things to do. So if you have any Syros specific questions that I might be able to answer for you, leave them in the comments and I'll try to help you out. So after that, I went to Hania, like I mentioned earlier, and then after that, I spent a few days in Athens, and that was my Greece travel itinerary. Let's talk about getting from island to island. So I used Ferry Hopper to book all of my ferries between any of the islands that I needed ferries for. I found it to be really easy to use. The one mistake I made is somehow I did book one of my ferries for the complete wrong date. I ended up getting a credit back. I don't know when or if I'll be able to use it, but check your dates really carefully when you are booking your ferries. And as you are mapping out your itinerary and your travel dates and how long you want to stay in each place, before booking any accommodations or tours or making any definitive plans per island, I strongly recommend you first map everything out, go on Ferry Hopper, and make sure that the dates that you want to travel from island to island, that there are actually ferries going that route on those dates. Now again, I went in October, so not as many ferries as frequently as you would see in peak season, but even if you're going in peak season, you want to do that step first to make sure that you can get a space on the ferry for the date and time that you want. And you want to secure that before then you can go back and fill in all the other fun things in your itinerary, but the logistics of getting from one place to another will be important to set up in advance. I have a link to Ferry Hopper that I will put in the description of this video as well. I encourage you to download the app because that made it really easy for me to just be able to pull up my tickets. Now, I never travel without a portable phone charger so that my phone can always be charged, and I also have an eSIM so that I can get connected to a network while I'm traveling. I recommend those two things for you too, and I will link in the description my exact charger and my exact eSIM that I prefer. If you want to be safe no matter what, screenshot the tickets on your phone so that in case there's some kind of a network error, you still have them in your photos. If you are prone to motion sickness, any kind of seasickness, or if you're not sure, then better safe than sorry. I do get motion sick quite easily in the car. I can never read. I can't even be looking at billboards out the window. So that's my baseline. I for sure had Dramamine with me, and I made sure to take my Dramamine before any ferry ride. I never waited to see, will I need it? Is the water really that choppy? No. I just took it regardless, and I did not get onto any ferry without making sure that I had a bottle of Sprite or ginger ale and a bag of salty chips. I would take sips of my drink, I would take bites of chips, and it did help me despite the Dramamine. I needed that additional push. I hope that this was helpful for you. Like I mentioned, this is only the very first in my series of Greece travel videos. I have videos planned for you all about each of the islands that I mentioned in this video that I have been to. Also about Athens, also about the best souvenirs that are actually worth your money, all about solo traveling in Greece. My entire 3 weeks I was solo, and also about what it's really like to visit Greece in October. Subscribe for more.